this day to serve. A lot of friends and cousins you didn't have.
Is be happy.
You can do. The real empowerment comes
faced with a crisis I'd never anticipated. I was told that one of the dorm matrons was suspected of sexual abuse. Well, that was, as you can imagine, devastating news. First I cried, actually I sobbed for about a half an hour. And then I said, let's get to it. That's all you get, is a half an hour. You need to focus on the now, what you need to do now. So I contacted a child trauma specialist. I put together a team of investigators. I made sure the girls had counseling and support. And Gail and I got on a plane and flew to South Africa. And the whole time I kept asking that question, what is this here to teach me? And as difficult as that experience has been, I got a lot of lessons. I understand now the mistakes I made because I had been paying attention to all of the wrong things. I built that school from the outside in, when what really mattered was the inside out. So it's a lesson that applies to all of our lives as a whole. What matters most is what's inside. What matters most is the sense of integrity, of quality, and beauty. I got that lesson. And what I know is that the girls came away with something too. They've emerged from this more resilient and knowing that their voices have power.
Rule number 6, serve.
I have always known this about celebrity. The real power of
acting with responsibility.
More of yourself and to grow yourself into the best of yourself. Become so skilled, so vigilant, so flat out fantastic at what you do that your talent cannot be dismissed.
Rule number 5, learn from the challenges.
Nobody's journey is seamless or smooth. We all stumble, we all have setbacks. If things go wrong, you hit a dead end, as you will. It's just life's way of saying, time to change course. So ask every failure, this is what I do. Every failure, every crisis, every difficult time, I say, what is this here to teach me? And as soon as you get the lesson, you get to move on. If you really get the lesson, you pass and you don't have to repeat the class. If you don't get the lesson, it shows up wearing another pair of pants or skirt to give you some remedial work.
Welcome to the latest episode of Idea Lab. We're lucky today to be joined by Bob Cialdini, who's Regents Professor Emeritus of Psychology and Marketing at Arizona State University. Bob, welcome.
Well, thank you, Eric. I'm very pleased to be here.
Now, you are the author of a wonderful new book called Persuasion, which follows another book from 20 years ago, 30 years ago, called Influence, which is really one of the canonical books about why people make the decisions they make. It's taught in psychology courses around the world, and clever marketers use it as well in their business. Could you walk us back to Influence, which is kind of the foundation for Persuasion, and tell us about how the books differ from each other, how you did the research for each of them, and where they take you?
All my life, I've been a sucker. I've been a patsy for the appeals of various fundraisers or salespeople who've come to my door, and I would stand in unwanted possession of tickets to the sanitation workers' ball and subscriptions to Beekeeper's Digest, and I always thought to myself, how did this happen? Because I didn't want these things on their merit. It must have been the presentation of those things that got me to say yes to them. Isn't that interesting? Let me study.
Bonjour, this is Sharon Au. So happy to be back in Singapore to see my mother.
Happy Thanksgiving! Oh, come on, my goodness. Happy Thanksgiving! Wow, how many of you are ready for Thanksgiving? Now, the people that just raised their hands, they're the ones that aren't doing anything. You understand? They're the ones that are just, they just come and sit down at that table and, they just eat and enjoy themselves. I'm about this. I love Thanksgiving, and it's a great time to be with family. I hope you're able to do that. And it's a great time to just really express thanks and be thankful. And we're going to talk to you in a moment about how to feed your faith and starve your fears. And I just love the title, since it's Thanksgiving week. How to feed your faith. Most of you are like me. We are gifted in feeding our face. But we're going to talk about how do you feed your faith, and in the same, how do you starve your doubts? Because it's so true. In the Tale of Two Wolves, the Cherokee Indian is telling his grandson that he said there are two wolves within you, one bad, one good. And the grandson looks at the wise chief and asks him, which one is going to live within me? And he says, the one you feed. And it's very true. You can either feed your faith or you can feed your fears. But if you feed your faith, you'll starve your fears and your doubts. If you feed your fears, you'll starve your faith. And there's a great story in Numbers chapter 13 that talks about this. Great illustration. It's the story of the 12 spies who went to the promised land. They came back over. 10 were full of fear, and that fear was contagious to the entire people of Israel. And the other 2 were full of faith. And we're going to just read the scripture very quickly. We're going to go down, and I'm going to give you observations, some observations about people that are full of fear. And see if you don't connect with some of these of people that you know. I know that's not you, but how many of you know somebody like that? You know what I'm saying? Okay? So let's look at these observations. Number 1 is that they experience the same thing as people of faith. In other words, people of fear go through the same experiences and are exposed to the same things as people of faith. Isn't it interesting that sometimes we think, well, people of faith, they just have it better. And they've just had a better outlook in life, and they've exposed to better things. And people of fear, they maybe have just kind of missed out. Maybe that's why they're fearful. It's not really true. And so we're going to look at the story, and we're going to go through it pretty quickly, but you'll get the point. So number 1, they experience the same thing as people of faith, and the scripture is on the screen. And let's look at it. When they arrived at the Esco Valley, they cut off a branch with a single cluster of grapes. It took 2 men to carry it, slung on a pole. They also picked some pomegranates and figs, and they named the place Esco Valley, Grape Cluster Valley, because of the huge cluster of grapes that they had cut down there. And after 40 days of scouting out the land, they returned home. They presented themselves before Moses and Aaron and the whole congregation of the people in Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They reported to the whole congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Then they told them the story of their trip. They not only saw the same thing, the negative and the people of faith, but the second thing that's obvious is they saw the evidence of good things. They not only looked and saw all the abundance of this area, but they even brought the evidence and saw it. It says in verse 27, we went to the land to which you sent us, and oh, it does flow with milk and honey. Just look at this fruit. Now, I think by now we're understanding that same trip, same purpose, same place. 2 came back with faith, 10 came back with fear. Now, what is the difference? And the difference is very simple. We see things not as they are, we see things as we are. So if I'm a trusting person, I see you as a person that's probably trusting. If I'm a suspicious person, I probably look at you and I have some suspicion about you. We see others as we are. We see things as we are, not as they are. That's why 2 people can be in the same place, under the same conditions, and they come back with 2 total different conclusions. So now we go to number 3, the third point, and the third point is they quickly turn the conversation from the positive to the negative. Now this is what people of fear do. They take any kind of a conversation, and before long they can turn it south. Verse 28, and this word only just strikes me. The only thing is that the people who live there are fierce, their cities are huge and well fortified. Now, they've shown the fruit of the land, they've held it up, people are looking at it, they're touching it, they're amazed. And now the people that are going to go negative, the people of fear, that they come out, and I love it, they say the only thing. Now, I'm amused at that because people of fear don't have just only one thing. Trust me. When they start talking, that fear begins to spread, that fear begins to grow, that fear begins to exaggerate. Which brings me to the fourth point. They build on a negative story and make it worse. In other words, they'll take something that is negative, and before a while, it's not only thing, it's everything. In verses 28, 29, worse yet, here we go. We saw the descendants of the giant Anak. Amalekites are spread out in the Negev. Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, termites. Just check and see if you're with me. That's all. Just want to check. They hold on to the hill country. The Canaanites are established on the Mediterranean Sea and along the Jordan. Now you can see the negative picture is getting bigger. Number 5, they reject the encouragement and the faith of others. So again, not only do people of fear see the same opportunities that people of faith see and are exposed to the same things, but they often are brought back to a faith perspective or a positive perspective, and yet it still doesn't have an impact on them. Because in verse 30, Caleb interrupted. He's one of the 2 people of faith, Caleb and Joshua. Caleb interrupted and said, he called for silence before Moses and said, let's go up and take the land now. We can do it. Now when he said, let's go up and take the land now, that now just stands out. Because a person of faith says, we can have the promised land right now. We can have the best that God has for us right now, today. A person of fear says, no, that's not going to happen. You see, the difference between a person of faith and a person of fear in this story is the person of faith can go to the promised land today, and the person of fear will wander in the wilderness for 40 years. And never see what God's best is for their life. Number 6, and this is probably maybe the worst thing about people of fear, is they exaggerate and they instill fear in others. What happens is they begin to talk about their fears, and the more they talk about their fears, the more this fear begins to be contagious. It begins to spread. Look at verses 31, 32. But the other said, we can't attack those people. They're way stronger than we are. And they spread scary rumors among the people of Israel, and they said, we scouted out the land from one end to the other, and it's a land that, now this is amazing. I've never seen land do this before. It's a land that swallows people whole. Isn't that amazing? I've never seen that. Have you ever just kind of like been walking with a friend, all of a sudden they're gone, and you? Isn't it amazing? It's just incredible. This was an amazing place, swallowing people whole. And then I love this phrase. Everybody we saw was huge. Everybody? Huh? Everybody? What? Babies when they're born, 150 pounds? Everybody was huge. The land swallows people whole. Why? We even saw the Nephilim giants and the Anak giants who come from Nephilim. Number 7, people of fear have usually a very poor self-image. Because what happens is the fears that they have out of life and others begins to project on themselves. And in verse 33, we see this. Alongside of them, we felt like grasshoppers. Oh my gosh. We've gone from giants over there to grasshoppers here. We felt like, and they looked down on us as if we were grasshoppers. You get the picture? Those giants over there in the promised land. They looked down and said, I believe those are Israelites. My gosh. They're as small as a grasshopper. Another one bites the dust. Can you imagine? You see, when we talk about this kind of fear, we say, this just seems to be a little bit over. I mean, just a little bit exaggerated. Let me just tell you, that's exactly what fear does. Fear takes things that are normal and they make it abnormal. Or they takes things that is abnormal and it makes it even more abnormal. And the last lesson, quickly, is these people of fear, they cause others to fail to reach their potential. In other words, the other people don't reach their potential because they listen to people of fear. Chapter 14, verses 1 through 3, the whole community was in an uproar, wailing all night long. Can you imagine? Listen to all the children, they're just wailing. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the entire community was in on it. And then look what they're saying. Why didn't we die in Egypt or in this wilderness? Why has God brought us to this country to kill us? Our wives and children are about to become plunder. I've always thought that was an interesting verse. Our wives and children are going to be about to become plunder. What were the guys going to do? Run? Why don't we just head back to Egypt and head back right now? Now, there are going to be several main points in this lesson, and I'm going to give one of them to you right now. It's not the only one, but it's one of them, and it's a very simple one, and you're going to get it because you just heard the story now, and that is, never let fear decide your future. Never go into the future deciding on what you're going to do and what's going to happen based upon the fears in your life. Because that's exactly... exactly what happens in the story. And so what happens because they let fear control their future and make their decision? Well, it's simple. They wander in the wilderness for 40 years. They miss out on the very best that God had for them, the promised land, and they died in the wilderness. They died in the wilderness. And you know what I've always asked? There's nothing biblically that tells me pro or con on this, but because this story is an incredible human interest story. I've had to believe that while the parents were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, I mean, they're going nowhere. They're just doing circle eights and going in circles. That's all they're doing. You have to believe that the parents sit down with their kids and said, I don't want you to do what I did. Let me tell you the reason, because don't you think kids have, what are kids always asking? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And think about it. Are we there yet? Well, are we there yet? Well, wow, we were here last year. My gosh, we're going around in circles. Why are we going around in circles? Honey, I got to tell you something. I let fear control my decision. And when fear ever controls your decision, it's a wrong decision. Now, how do these people, how do they feed their fears? I mean, because that's exactly what they did. They started kind of with a little fear, and after a while, it became a big fear. How do they do that? Well, there are two things that they did that I think really caused the third thing, but let me give it to you right now. First of all, people that feed their fears, like the people here, they forgot the past. They forgot the past. In other words, they forgot what God had done for them. Now, what's amazing is, wow, God did some amazing things for them. In fact, I get very baffled at this part of the story because I ask myself, how could they forget? How could they forget? I mean, how could they have forgotten about the fact that they were slaves? I mean, they didn't have their own life. They're making mud bricks every day and building homes and buildings for this incredible, powerful nation on earth, the most powerful nation at that time, Egypt. I mean, how could they forget that they were slaves? How could they have forgotten the day that Moses came? How could they have forgotten the words of Moses to Pharaoh, let my people go? How could they have forgotten the plagues? How could they have forgotten how that hard-hearted Pharaoh finally just could resist it no more so that the people can go? And how could they have forgotten as Moses takes them to the Red Sea and the rod, and boy, they cross over and they're safe. And how could they have forgotten how the waters just happened, the Egyptian soldiers perished? I mean, how could they have forgotten all this stuff? I mean, this didn't happen like 20 years ago. It just happened a couple months ago. How could they have forgotten? You see, there's a tendency for us to think that the people of fear just kind of forget the little things. Let me tell you something. People of fear, they forget the big things. And in fact, let me tell you something. When I look at what they saw God do, I've never seen God do this stuff. I mean, hello? I've never seen God bring plagues on people. I've asked for it a couple of times, but it didn't happen. Huh? I've never seen miracles like that. I've never seen water just part and you could walk. I mean, honestly, I mean, you had to go by boat or bridge. I've never seen anything they see. Here's what I want you to do. When fear grips your life and when fear controls your life, the best that God can give you will be forgotten. They forgot the past. The second thing is they became satisfied with the present. Isn't this interesting? Instead of going into the promised land, the throne with milk and honey, where they brought these big poles back with the grapes and the pomegranates and the figs and things like they had never seen before, that they decided that they would stay in the wilderness. There was no comparison. There was no comparison at all. But yet fear will make you settle for less. When you become satisfied with the present, you're not going to move into the future. Sad is that day for any person when they become absolutely satisfied with the life they're living, the things they're thinking, the deeds that they're doing, until there ceases to be forever beating at the door of their soul a desire to do something greater for God. And yet that's exactly where they were. They're wandering in the wilderness, they're doing figure eights, and basically they're saying, you know what, I think this will do. I think the wilderness will do. Think of it. Children of God, destined for a promised land, living in the wilderness. They became fearful of the future. Now there's a great illustration here that I don't want us to miss. When God brings us to a place that he wants us to go forward and grow in, when God brings us to a test, and we make a decision, you know what? I don't think I want to do that. I'm going to back off of that. Let me tell you what God will do. God will let you wonder. God will let you wander in the wilderness for 40 years. We know that. This is a biblical story. He'll just let you do your own thing, and let you live where you want to live, and let you do what you want to do, and let you have what you want to have. He'll let you just be satisfied, and let you wander in the wilderness. You just wander in the wilderness and just kind of keep going around in circles. But let me tell you something. When they finished wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, where did God take them? He took them right back to the place that they said no to God 40 years ago. Listen to me. God will never let you skip the lessons he has for you. Oh, you can avoid them, you can... God let you wander in the wilderness for 40 years. We know that. This is a biblical story. I think this will do. I think the wilderness will do. Think of it. Children of God, destined for a promised land, living in the wilderness. They became fearful of the future. Now there's a great illustration here that I don't want us to miss. When God brings us to a place that he wants us to go forward and grow in, when God brings us to a test, and we decide, we make a decision, you know what? I don't think I want to do that. I'm going to back off of that. Let me tell you what God will do. God will let you wander. God will let you wander in the wilderness for 40 years. We know that. This is a biblical story. He'll just he'll let you do your own thing, and let you live where you want to live, and let you do what you want to do, and let you have what you want to have. He'll let you just be satisfied, and let you wander in the wilderness. You just wander in the wilderness and just kind of keep going around in circles. But let me tell you something. When they finished wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, where did God take them? He took them right back to the place that they said no to God 40 years ago. Listen to me. God will never let you skip the lessons he has for you. Oh, you can avoid them, you can wander through them, you can delay them, but when you're ready to get with it, and when you're ready to grow, and when you're ready to be that person that God really wants you to be, and you're ready to move forward, and you're ready to go to the promised land, let me tell you what God always does. God always brings you and me right back to the place of disobedience. And he asks us the same question that we were asked 40 years ago. to God 40 years ago. Listen to me. God will never let you skip the lessons he has for you. Oh, you can avoid them, you can wander through them, you can delay them, but when you're ready to get with it, and when you're ready to grow, and when you're ready to be that person that God really wants you to be, and you're ready to move forward, and you're ready to go to the promised land, let me tell you what God always does. God always brings you and me right back to the place of disobedience. And he asks us the same question. You're ready to be that person that God really wants you to be, and you're ready to move forward, and you're ready to go to the promised land. Let me tell you what God always does. God always brings you and me right back to the place of disobedience. And he asks us the same question that we were asked 40 years ago. He just looks at us and says, okay, I brought you back there. Could I ask you the question again? Would you like to go over to the promised land? Now, we're talking about people full of fear. And we're talking about how contagious you are. This is a story where, they were really contagious. David, could you just throw me a bottle of water here? That one right there will be fine. Thank you very much. So here we go. First of all, do we all not know somebody just like this? Huh? Like the 10 spies? It's kind of like, ooh, they live right next door to me. Now let's make sure. So my favorite kind of like fear story, I had to pull this one out of the mouthfuls. I hadn't pulled this story for, 7 or 8 years. But I love it, and you'll enjoy this. So it's about a barber who is a person full of doubts and fears and negativism. So he's got one of his customers in his chair, and so they're starting to talk, and his customer says, I'm going to Rome tomorrow. And the barber said, well, I used to live in Italy. He said, tell me about it. He said, what air carrier are you going over? And the guy told him his flight, and he said, I wish you weren't on that air carrier. Their safety record's not real strong. And they're late a lot. And the seats are very uncomfortable. I really wish you weren't going on with that air carrier. And where are you going to stay? And the guy told him the hotel. I said, oh, you've got to be kidding. You stay at that hotel? I know that hotel really well. Service is terrible. I just hope you get towels. I said, well, what are you going to do when you're there? The guy said, well, I said, really? We're supposed to have a sales meeting a couple mornings from now, and we're going to present this plan, and we just hope that, we hope to really do good and sell well. And I said, oh my gosh, I wish you. We're doing that. She just don't know Italians. They talk, but they don't buy. They talk, but they don't buy. They don't talk. And the guy in the chair, he's just getting as low as he can go. And he's just mumbling to himself. Pope. And the person, did I hear you say Pope? Yeah. What about the Pope? Well, since I was already over there, I was just hoping I could see the Pope. And the barber starts laughing. Oh, you got to be kidding. Oh, you know nothing. Only important people see the Pope. Pope ain't going to go see you. Oh, my gosh, you got a whole waste of. You're going to sell to people who don't want to buy. You're going to see the Pope ain't going to go see you. You aren't going to get towels. And the guy just slinks out of the barber shop. A month later, he's back in the same chair. Barber said, well, how'd it go? The guy says, it was amazing. He said, that air carrier you told me not to go on? Left on time. Fell asleep. The landing was so smooth, the flight attendant had to wake me up. We arrived 30 minutes early. It was amazing. And the hotel, remember the hotel? He said, when I walked up to the front of the hotel, the service people were there with fresh towels for me. I've never had to just handed me, before I even registered, they just handed me these towels. And I registered, and he said, I went and I got in my room and got out on the balcony. I could see the Vatican from my balcony. He said the next morning he went to my sales thing. About an hour and a half into it, the Italians loved it. They said they wanted not only what we had, but they wanted to have orders. We got to go back next month. Best sales meeting I've ever had. And he said, highlight of the trip, got to see the Pope. The Pope said, you saw the Pope? I've never met anybody that saw the Pope. Oh my gosh, tell me about it. You saw the Pope? What did he say? What happened? Tell me. I've never met anybody that saw the Pope. Tell me about it. Well, the guy said, they brought me in this kind of long room, red carpet, gilded gold. And at the far end, the Pope sat. And he said, I just walked slowly toward him. And he said, the closer I got, the more humbled I felt. He said, by the time I got to him, I just went to my knees. It was just all I knew. And he put out his hand, and I kissed his ring, and I said, oh, your holiness, your holiness, your holiness. So he took his hands and put it on my head to bless me. My son, where did you ever get such a lousy haircut? Isn't that fun, huh? Isn't that fun, huh? I love that. So how do people feed their faith? Okay, we talked enough about the fearful people. The people feed their faith. Let me tell you what they do. They do the opposite of people that feed their fear. Let me give you an example. Fear causes us to forget the good things God's done for us. Faith causes us to remember the good things God has done for us. Totally opposite. You show me a person of faith, and they'll tell you, oh, I remember when God did this for me, and oh my gosh, God did that for me. And I'm telling you, there was a time when God, and they're always, they just know, they remember, look what God did to me. And they just are, they're constant, they have an attitude of gratitude. David read the James 1:7, every good and perfect gift comes from God. And that's how they feel. They just say everything that comes from God. And I know we got Thanksgiving this Thursday, but listen, I'm telling you, these people, they're just not into Thanksgiving, they're into Thanksgiving. It's something they do all the time. This is something they do every day. They're just grateful for God and what he has done. My father's 95, just turned 95 this week, and so we're going up to be with him up in his area, my brother's ranch, and so the kids, the grandkids, we're all going. It's kind of good. Dad's still doing good, but he's just not quite as strong as he was. In fact, he was chaplain of the assisted care living, and he's got some lower back issues, so he had to give it up. He had to give that up, and so Mark and I were with him for last week for Sunday. Last Sunday we were up there. And he was so excited. He said, I had to give up my, I don't go around visiting the people now. He said, I can't quite do that now. But he said, I started a new ministry. He said, I've got a telephone ministry now. And it's amazing. He said, people can call in now, and I pray for them. He said, I just hand my number everywhere and just say, need prayer, just call me. And he said, the phone's ringing off the hook. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't it beautiful? 95, can't now walk around and really help people like he wants to. So he's got a telephone ministry. My dad's going to live till he dies. And he's not going to get too confused. Most people do. I know a whole bunch of people, they're already dead. They just haven't made it official yet. And people of faith, what do people of faith do? People of faith, they remember the good things. They remember the good things that God, and attitude is contagious. Isn't that true? Birds of a feather flock together. That's why people of faith flock together. People of fear flock together. Now, all of us know somebody that's negative. How many of you know at least one negative person? Would you raise your hand? Just one? That's good, yeah. Some of you got two hands up. Some of you are trying to... How many of you are sitting beside that person right now? Just, yeah. Okay, don't. That second question is an IQ test. Okay? Now, I'm going to help you, though. We all have heard negative people, and they just depress us, don't they? They're like the barber. They pull us down. But I want to tell you, I have a way that you can never have that happen again. So if you got somebody that's always negative, this works. It really works. Trust me, I've done this. This works. This is kind of like my name's John. I'm your friend. This really works. If somebody comes up and they're negative, and they just start dumping that stuff on, just take this left hand right here. This finger right here. Put it right there. You've got to be coordinated to do this. Close your eyes. Ah! They will stop immediately. Trust me, I've done it. This works every time. And what's really beautiful is all you have to do is do it once. Just if they ever do it again, all you got to do is get about right here. You follow me? Isn't that beautiful? That's all you got to do. That's all you got to do. Now, here's how faith and fear works. See, we never get rid of all fear. We have the negative and the positive within us. And the one that wins out is the one that's more powerful. If fear is stronger than faith, fear will usually win out. If faith is stronger than fear, faith will win out. And what we need to do is understand that if we feed that faith, we'll starve that fear. When I was in my late 20s, I really felt God speaking to me about learning to be salt and light and learning to share my faith and leading people to Christ in just secular world. But I was full of fear. I was full of a lot of fear because I never had done this before, and I knew that I'd get a lot of people that would say no, and I knew that there would be a lot of people that would be open to what I shared, and I knew that it wasn't always going to be good. And so I had some of this fear, and the fear was a little bit heavier than my faith, and it was holding me back. And one day I was reading in Acts chapter 4, and it was about the early church and the early apostles and the leaders who were out witnessing, and they were threatened. They were threatened. You know, they were put in prison, they were beaten, they were but they were threatened. And as soon as I saw that, oh, that's exactly how I feel. And so, but they prayed a prayer, and it was easy. And amazing what they said. They said, God, behold their threatenings. You know, the first thing that they wanted when they felt that fear is they wanted to know that God saw their problem. I just want you, God, did you see that? Did you see what they're saying? Did you feel that rejection? God, behold their threatenings. In other words, the first thing we need to do when we have fear is understand that God is aware of everything that we're going through, every fear, every negative thing, every bad thing. Understand, God's aware. The second thing that happened to them is that fill us with boldness. They were feeling cold and they wanted to feel bold. And they said, fill us with boldness. So they got bold. They said, would you do me a favor? The fear is a little bit heavy for me, so could you give me some boldness? I need something to booster my faith, to get my faith above that fear. And the third thing they said, and God, could we see you do miracles in the lives of people? In other words, could we see your hand? Could we see your hand? And when I read that, I began to understand very quickly that how you feed your faith is you recognize your problem. Say, God, I've got a fear here. I've got a problem here. I've got a difficulty with this. This is hard for me. There's a mountain in front of me. This is a challenge. It's okay. Tell God. He already knows. He's aware of where you are. Let him know. Say, I've got some fears, so I need some boldness. I need some boldness. And God, can I just see your hand every once in a while? Just work in the lives of the people. You see, fear causes us to despair of our future, but faith enables us to depend upon God for our future. You see, fear is the result of being self-dependent, and faith is the result of being God-dependent. So how do I feed my faith? Okay, the story's unfolding now. Gratitude. You feed your faith by being grateful for what God has done for you. It's exactly opposite of people of fear. They don't remember the good things. People of faith remember the good things God has done. Gratitude. Second is growth. They become people of faith because they do things of faith. They cross the Jordan. They begin to take the risk. They move forward. They begin to grow. And the third area is to being God. God dependent. They realize that there are things in their world that they have to depend on God. If they don't depend on God, they will never receive them and never achieve them in their life. So how do you feed your faith? Gratitude. Don't forget what God has done for you. Growth. Go forward. Don't wonder. Don't be satisfied. Don't stay where you are. and become God dependent. I was in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago. And wherever I go, a lot of times people give me coins, and they're very popular right now. And I had a man come up to me, a leader come up to me and said, I want to give you a coin. And he said, I think this is the secret to the Christian faith and walk. And so I thanked him and stuck it in my pocket. I really didn't even look at it. And later on, when I get in the car to go back to the plane, I pulled it out and I looked at it. And on one side, it has gratitude. And on the other side, it has dependence. And I thought how true that is. Be grateful and remember every good thing that God has done for you. But be dependent. Because those fears and all the things that you're going to face in the future, you need God. In fact, I'll tell you how we're supposed to be in a relationship with Him. It's the story that I love so well in Luke chapter 18. People brought babies to Jesus, hoping that He might touch them. When the disciples saw it, they shooed them off. Jesus called them back. Let these children alone. Don't get between them and me. These children are the kingdom's pride and joy. Mark this, unless you accept God's kingdom in the simplicity of a child, you're never going to get in. What is a child? A child is dependent. Dependent on God. Dependent on a parent. When I was young in my ministry, there was a passage of scripture that bothered me, and I wrestled for probably 6 months, I wrestled with God over this. Jesus said, without me, you can do nothing. And I couldn't figure that verse out because I said, man, I don't mean to sound kind, but I'm doing a lot of things without God. And I'd make my list. I'd say, God did this, did this, did this. I wasn't trying to be aloof. I wasn't trying to be arrogant. I was having a hard time. Without me, you can do nothing. And then one day, I learned and sat at His feet. And He said, what that means, John, is without me, you can do nothing of eternal consequences. There's nothing that is going to be eternal that you can do. You have to depend on me for every eternal thing. And because I'm a person of eternal values, I every day I basically pray this kind of like this declaration of dependence with God, and I basically say, I don't know who I'm going to see, I don't know where I'm going to go, I don't know what I'm going to be interacting and who I'm going to be acting with, but God, here's what I want. I want you to do eternal things through my life today. I don't want to do wood, hay, and stubble. Wood, hay, and stubble, I know that's what I do. That's what Maxwell does. I want to do the eternal stuff. I grew up with a plaque in our home that said, only one life, it'll soon be past. And only what's done for God will last. That's God dependency. When you and I just depend on God to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. There was a little song, a little chorus that we used to sing a long time ago. This is going to date me. I'm going to give it to you, and probably none of you have heard it. But it was a simple chorus called Learning to Lean. Learning to lean, I'm learning to lean on Jesus. And I'm finding more power than I ever dreamed. Why? Because I'm learning to lean on Jesus. It goes something like this. Learning to lean, learning to lean. I'm learning to lean on Jesus. I'm finding more power than I ever dreamed. I'm learning to lean on Jesus. Now, how many of you ever heard that? 10 of you. It's just pathetic how uneducated all of you are. So it's learning to lean. Learning to lean. I'm learning to lean on Jesus. I'm finding more power than I ever dreamed. Learning to lean on Jesus. Sing it with me, would you? Learning to lean. Learning to lean. I'm learning to lean on Jesus. I'm finding more power than I ever dreamed. I'm learning to lean on Jesus. Oh, that's pretty good. Do it again with me. Learning to lean. I'm learning to lean. I'm learning to lean on Jesus. I'm finding more power than I ever dreamed. I'm learning to lean on Jesus. And when you learn to lean on Jesus, do you know what He tells you to do? Lean harder. Lean harder. Cast all your anxieties, your fears on Him, because He cares for you. The campus pastors now are going to take charge of each one of our campus churches. We're so glad to have you, the campus is with us. We're so glad to have you online with us. And I'm going to close out in prayer in the Gardens campus. God bless you, and happy Thanksgiving to each one of you. And for you here at the Gardens campus, it's good to be back and be with you. And I do have my book, Leadership Promises for Every Day, and I'm going to go out and sign it. And let me tell you, it's a devotional, and it's one a day, and it's just a scripture verse and a few lines. It's for people that aren't heavy readers, okay? It's for read light people, okay? And what I want you to get this. It starts, and this is a great Thanksgiving gift, because if you're going now for Thanksgiving and you haven't done one thing to help, you need to bring this as a gift. for all the people that are making that turkey for you. You understand that, huh? It makes a great Christmas gift. Makes a great. I'm trying to bail you folks out. You understand that, don't you? I'm trying to bail you out, and I'll sign their name, and you take it and put it away and give it to them for Christmas, whatever. But it's great for you. It's great for you. I had somebody buy 7 of them in the last. I signed them, and they kept giving me the name, and I'd say, "Is this your name?" No, that's not. No, this is. And when they got down all 7, they didn't buy one for themselves. They bought one for everyone else. I said, this will work for you too. And about 5 minutes later, they came back with one more. I said, that's for me. That was for, I'll do it myself. So anyway, I'll sign it for you. Great to be with you. Great to be with you. Thank you, Father, for your word and how simple it is and how it helps us just understand how to be men and women of faith. And on this Thanksgiving, may we do more than just feed our faith. May we feed our faith. And may we just really make this a time of growth. In Jesus' name, all God's people said, amen. Amen. God bless you.
There was an immediate improvement which has been maintained ever since. At the time of writing, he is not completely cured, but is much better. Senility of larynx. Mr. X, a professor of Belfort, could not talk for more than 10 or 15 minutes without his throat becoming very irritated. Various doctors told him that there was no lesion in the vocal cords, but one stated that there was senility of the larynx, which led him to believe that he could never be cured. He came to Nancy for a vacation, and a lady friend advised him to see me. He refused at first, but finally consented in spite of his absolute disbelief in the effects of suggestion. I treated him notwithstanding and requested him to come back in a couple of days. He came and told me that on the previous day he had been able to converse all afternoon without the slightest indication of his old trouble. 2 days later he came to see me again to say that he had been absolutely free from sore throat, although he had not only been talking all the time, but also had been bold enough to sing the previous evening. The cure still holds good, and I am convinced that it is a lasting one. Pott's disease. Mr. Nagengast, aged 18, Rue Cellier, number 39, suffering from Pott's disease. He came to me early in 1914, having been encased in a plaster corset for 6 months. He came twice a week to the regular sittings and himself made the usual autosuggestion mornings and evenings. The improvement manifested itself very rapidly, and very soon the patient was able to do without his plaster corset. I saw him again in 1916. He was entirely cured, carrying on his duties as a postman after having been an infirmier, tending the sick in connection with the Nancy ambulance service, where he had stayed until the service had been discontinued. Eczema. Mrs. H. of Maxwell suffers from eczema, particularly intense on the left leg. Both legs swollen and inflamed, especially at the ankles. Walking difficult and painful. Suggestions. The same evening, Mrs. H. was able to walk several hundred yards without fatigue. The next morning, the feet and ankles were no longer swollen and have not been swollen since. The eczema disappeared rapidly. Gout. Mr. E. of Troyes had an attack of gout. The right ankle was inflamed and painful, and he was unable to walk. The preliminary experiments proved him to be a very responsive subject. After the first treatment, he was able to walk to the carriage which brought him without using his cane for support. There was no more pain. The next day, he did not come back, as I had instructed him to do. Later, his wife came to tell me that her husband had risen early that morning, had put on his shoes, and gone off on a bicycle to his workshop. He is a painter. Just imagine my astonishment. I have not been able to follow up this case, as the patient never troubled himself to come and see me again. I learned later that he had gone a long time without any relapse, but I do not know what has become of him. Club feet. T. Maurice, 8.5 years old of Nancy, has club feet. A first operation cured the left foot, or nearly so, the right foot remaining crippled. 2 subsequent operations did no good. The child was brought to me for the first time in February 1915. He walked fairly well, owing to 2 contrivances which held his feet straight. An improvement was noticed immediately after the first treatment, and after the second the child was able to walk in ordinary shoes. On April 17th, the child was quite well. The right foot, however, is not quite as strong as it was because of a sprain which was received on February 20th, 1916. Rheumatism. Mrs. Metter, 52 years, of Onville. For 6 months, she suffered from pain in the right knee, accompanied by swelling, which made the bending of the knee impossible. She saw me for the first time on 7th December 1917. She came again on 4th of January 1918 to tell me that she suffered no more pain and that she was able to walk quite normally. Mr. Ferry Eugene, 60 years old, Rue de la Cote, 56, had rheumatic pains in the shoulder and the left leg for 5 years. He walked with difficulty, leaning on a cane, and could not lift his arms above the shoulder. He consulted me on 17th of September 1917. After the first visit, the pains had entirely vanished, and the patient could not only take long strides, but could also run. Moreover, he could whirl his arms like a windmill. I saw him again in November, and there had been no relapse. Mrs. Castilli, 41 years, of Onville, for 13 years, intermittent rheumatic pain in the right knee. 5 years ago, she had a more violent attack than ever before. The knee, as well as the leg, began swelling considerably, and then the lower part of the leg atrophied, and the patient was reduced to walking very painfully with the aid of a cane or a crutch. I saw her for the first time on 5th of November 1917, and she walked away without the help of either cane or crutch. Since then, she never had any more use for the crutch, but occasionally did use the cane. Once in a while, the pain in the knee recurs, but it is very slight. Palsy. Mr. X, post office clerk at Luneville, lost a child in January 1910. This caused a cerebral disturbance which manifested itself by uncontrollable nervous trembling. His uncle brought him to me in the month of June. Preliminary experiments were followed by suggestions. 4 days later, he came back to tell me that his trembling had disappeared. I repeated the suggestions with instructions to call again in a week. The week went by, then 2, 3, 4 weeks passed with no news from him. A little while afterwards, his uncle came to tell me that he had received a letter from his nephew, informing him that the latter was perfectly well, that he had been reinstated in his position as a telegraph clerk, which he had previously been obliged to abandon, and that on the day he wrote the letter, he had sent off a lengthy telegram of 170 words without the least difficulty. He added in his letter that he could have easily sent off an even longer one. There has been no relapse. Stammering. Miss Linier, 15 years, Rue Montet, 88, stammered from infancy. She came on July 20, 1917, and was instantly delivered from her defect. I saw her a month later and found her permanently cured. Kidney disease. Mrs. P. of Lanaville had pains in her kidneys and knees. Her complaint dated back 10 years. She was going from bad to worse every day. Suggestion on my part and autosuggestion on her part. Improvement was immediate and progressed satisfactorily. She was rapidly and permanently cured. Enteritis. Mr. A.J. of Troyes has suffered for a long time from enteritis, inflammation of the bowels, which different treatments failed to cure. He was in a very bad way, being depressed, gloomy, unsociable, and obsessed by thoughts of suicide. Preliminary experiments being satisfactory, suggestion followed. Appreciable results showed from the very first day. Continued suggestions for 3 months, at first daily, then at increasingly longer intervals. At the end of that time, there was a complete cure. The enteritis had entirely disappeared, and his mental condition was excellent. As this cure dates back for 12 years, without the slightest relapse, it may well be considered to be permanent. Mr. G is a striking example of the effects that can be produced by suggestion, or rather by autosuggestion. While I was making suggestions from the physical point of view, I also did so from a mental point of view, and he accepted the one suggestion as well as the other. His self-confidence increased daily, and, as he was an excellent workman, in order to earn more, he tried to obtain a machine which would enable him to work at home. Sometime after manufacturer, who had seen with his own eyes how good a workman he was, entrusted him with the very machine he so much desired. Thanks to his skill, Mr. G was able to turn out more work than an ordinary worker. Delighted with the result, his employer gave him another and still another machine, until Mr. G, who, but for his recourse to suggestions, would have remained an ordinary workman, now is in charge of 6 machines, which net him a handsome income. Nervous dyspepsia. Mrs. T of non-C had neurasthenia, dyspepsia, gastralgia, enteritis, and pains in different parts of the body. She treated herself for several years with negative results. I gave her suggestions, which she turned into autosuggestions daily. There was a noticeable improvement from the first day, which continued without interruption. She was cured long ago, both mentally and physically. She follows no special diet, thinks there still is perhaps a slight touch of enteritis, but is not sure. Neuralgia. Mrs. L of non-C, pains in the right side of the face over a period of more than 10 years, consulted many physicians whose prescriptions did not help. Finally, an operation was decided upon. But first, she came to me on the 25th of July, 1916. Her improvement was immediate. After 10 days, the pain vanished, and up to December 20th, there was no recurrence. Mrs. LaCour, 63 years, Chaman de Savoie, had pains in the face for the past 10 years. All treatments taken had availed her nothing, and when an operation was advised, she refused to submit to it. She consulted me for the first time on 25th of July, 1916. 4 days later, the pains had vanished, and she never had them again up to this day. Neurasthenia. Mr. Y of non-C, a sufferer from neurasthenia for several years, has aversions, nervous fears, disorders of the stomach and intestines. His sleep is broken. He is gloomy and haunted by ideas of suicide. When walking, he staggers like a drunken man and can think of nothing but his trouble. All other methods had failed, and he went from bad to worse. A month's treatment in a sanitarium had not the slightest effect. Mr. Y came to see me in early October 1910. The preliminary experiments proved comparatively easy. I explained to the patient the principles of autosuggestion, and also the existence within us of the conscious and unconscious being. Then I made suggestions. For 2 or 3 days, Mr. Y had a little trouble in grasping the explanations which I had given him, but in a little while his clouded mind saw the light and he understood. I gave him fresh suggestions, and he transformed them into autosuggestions every day, adding others of his own accord. The improvement was slow at first, but little by little, it progressed more rapidly. In a month and a half, the cure was complete. The invalid who so recently had looked upon himself as a most miserable man now considers himself most happy. Not only has there been no relapse, but it is impossible for such to occur, because Mr. Y is firmly convinced that he could not fall back into his former miserable state of existence. Mrs. X, a sister of Mrs. T, had a very bad case of neurasthenia and remained in bed 2 weeks out of every 4. It was impossible for her to move or work, suffered from a lack of appetite, depression, and digestive disorders. She was cured in a single sitting, and the cure seems to be a lasting one, as she has never had a relapse. Mrs. D of Miracourt, 16 years old, suffered for the past 3 years from nervous attacks. These attacks, infrequent in the beginning, kept recurring at shorter intervals. When she came to me on April 1st, 1917, she had had 3 attacks in 2 weeks. From that time to April 18th, there was not a single attack. I may add that since taking the treatment, this young girl was no longer troubled with bad headaches, from which she had previously suffered almost constantly. Varicose ulcers. Mrs. Urbain Marie, age 55 of Maxwell, had been suffering from varicose ulcers for a year and a half. The first treatment took place in September 1915. The second treatment a week later. There was an absolute cure in 2 weeks. Mrs. H, Rue Gilbert de Piscicourt, non-C, 49 years old, varicose ulcer since September 1914, which was treated by her doctor without success. The lower part of her leg was greatly enlarged. The ulcer was as large as a 2 francs piece, was located above the ankle and went to the bone. The inflammation was very intense. The suppuration was abundant and the pain extremely violent. The patient called for the first time in April 1916. An improvement was noticeable after the first visit and continued without interruption. By the 18th of February, the swelling had gone down completely, and the pain and irritation had vanished. The sore was still there, but it was no larger than a pea, and only 2 or 3 millimeters in depth. It still discharged very slightly. In 1920, the cure had long been complete. Mr. Philippe Shire, 48 years, of Bouxier Adam, came for the first time on 20th of April 1917 with a 15-year-old varicose sore on the left leg, as large as a 5 francs piece. On the 27th of April, the sore was healed. Saw him again on the 4th of May, and found the cure to be permanent. Ulcer. Mrs. X of Blainville had a sore on the left foot, probably of specific origin. A slight sprain caused the swelling of the foot, accompanied by acute pains. Various treatments had done no good, and after a little while, a saturating sore appeared, which seemed to indicate caries of the bone. Walking became more and more difficult in spite of continuous treatments. On the advice of a former patient of mine, she came to me, and relief was noticeable after the first few visits. Gradually, the swelling went down, the pain became less intense, the saturation became less and less, and finally, the sore was healed completely. It took a few months to get this result. At this writing, the foot is almost normal, and although the pain and swelling have disappeared, the backward flexion of the foot is not yet perfect, which causes the patient to limp slightly. Abscess. Ms. Z, also of Geneva, had undergone an operation for an abscess above the knee when she was 17 years old, and had, as a consequence, a drawn-up right leg. She requested Mr. Boudouin to give a treatment by suggestion, and he had hardly commenced doing so when the leg began to bend back and forth in a normal manner. It must be admitted that there was a psychological cause in this case. Frontal sinus. Mr. B had suffered for 24 years from inflammation of the frontal cavity sinus, which had been operated upon 11 times. But in spite of all that had been done, the inflammation, sinusite, persisted, causing intolerable pains. The physical state of the patient was extremely pitiable. He had almost continuously violent pains, no appetite, extreme weakness, and could neither walk, read, nor sleep. His nerves were in no better state than his body, and notwithstanding the treatment of such men as Burnham of Nancy, Desjardins of Paris, Dubois of Berne, X of Strasbourg, this pitiable state continued and grew worse every day. On the advice of one of my former patients, he came to me in September 1915. From that moment, his health improved rapidly, and at the present time, 1921, he is perfectly well. This was a real resurrection. Emile Coue, 10 years old, of 19 Grand Rue, a refugee from Metz, had heart trouble of uncertain nature, bled from the mouth every night. His first visit was in July 1915. After a few treatments, the loss of blood became less, improvement continued, and by the end of November...